They fired me on a Tuesday. Not just any Tuesday. The Tuesday. The one where my daughter's tuition payment was due, where my mom's chemo appointment was scheduled, where I'd finally earned enough equity to breathe for once in my 12-year American journey. 4:47 p.m. Pacific Time. The golden hour when the California sun bleeds through those floor-to-ceiling windows and makes everything look like success, even when your life is imploding. "Harry, we're going in a different direction." That's what Marcus Chen said, 32 years old. Stanford MBA, raised in Atherton, summered in Tahoe, never once worried about whether his H-1B visa would get renewed or whether his parents could afford insulin back home. He delivered those words leaning against my desk, the desk I'd occupied through 3 funding rounds, 2 near-death experiences for the company, and enough all-nighters to permanently damage my sleep schedule. The desk where I'd debugged code at 3 a.m. while my family slept, where I'd taken calls from frantic clients during Christmas dinner, where I'd built the systems that processed billions in transactions while Marcus was still in business school learning how to fire people like me. I didn't argue, didn't plead, just sat there with my hands resting on the mechanical keyboard I'd built myself. The one with the satisfying click that had become my signature sound in the open office. Every keystroke, a reminder that I'd built things here, real things, infrastructure that processed millions of transactions daily, code that never crashed even when the world was falling apart, code that Marcus couldn't read, couldn't understand, couldn't value beyond the salary line it represented on his spreadsheet. "Your redundancy package will be generous," Marcus continued, checking his Apple Watch like he had somewhere more important to be. 2 weeks per year of service, Cobra coverage for 60 days. We can have security walk you out now, or you can pack up tonight after everyone leaves." I looked past him at the mural behind his head. Innovation requires sacrifice. That's what it said in hipster script. I'd stared at that same wall through countless stand-ups, watching it get painted during the Series B celebration when we still believed we were changing the world. Now it felt like a threat, a promise that I was the sacrifice this particular innovation required. "Tonight's fine," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Maybe because some part of me, some part that had survived the Karachi heat, the visa interviews at the consulate, the lonely first winter in Chicago, where I didn't understand why Americans kept smiling at strangers, some part had already prepared for this moment. Maybe because I'd felt it coming like a storm front, pressure dropping, skies darkening, the inevitable arrival of weather you can't control. See, I'd learned something in my 43 years that Marcus, with his perfect teeth and venture capital connections, hadn't figured out yet. In America, they tell you that hard work is enough, that loyalty matters, that if you just keep your head down and build good things, you'll be safe. They don't tell you that safe is an illusion they sell to people like me while they plan our replacements. They don't tell you that your visa status makes you permanently precarious, that your accent marks you as expendable, that no matter how many systems you build, you're always just one decision away from irrelevance. But here's what they also don't tell you. When you come from somewhere else, when you've already lost everything once to start over in a new country, you learn to read rooms differently. You notice the small shifts, the way conversations pause when you walk into the kitchen, the invitations that stop coming, the strategic pivots discussed in meetings where your input suddenly isn't needed, the way your ideas get attributed to younger, wider voices in the room, the slow erosion of your territory, your influence, your place in the narrative of the company you'd helped birth. I'd been noticing for months, cataloging like a scientist observing a dying ecosystem. It started 6 months ago when Marcus brought in efficiency consultants, fresh faces from McKinsey or Bain. I never bothered to learn which. Young, confident, armed with spreadsheets showing how much money the company could save by right-sizing the engineering team. I sat through their presentation about optimizing human capital and heard every coded message between the lines. Experienced engineers cost too much. We could replace Harry with 3 junior developers in Bangalore for the same price. Never mind that I'd architected the entire payment processing system. Never mind that I knew where every vulnerability hid, every technical debt accumulated, every shortcut that would explode under scale. Never mind that I'd mentored half the engineering team, that I'd personally recruited our best talent, that my institutional knowledge was woven into every line of critical infrastructure. They saw a salary line item. I saw a life built grain by grain over 12 years. I saw the apartment in Chicago where I'd frozen through my first winter, too proud to buy a real coat because I was sending money home. I saw the ramen years, the studio apartment years, the years of saying no to vacations and new cars and anything that didn't serve the master plan of building security in a country that felt increasingly hostile to people who looked like me. That Tuesday evening I drove home to San Jose with a cardboard box on my passenger seat. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies with the desk plant and the framed photos. Just a box of my personal laptop, my noise-canceling headphones, and a ceramic mug my daughter made me in 3rd grade. The one that said, "World's Best Baba" in crooked letters. Everything else belonged to the company. My code, my documentation, the relationships I'd built with every major client. At least, that's what they believed. Or so they thought. My wife Aisha was making chai when I walked through the door. The smell hit me first. Cardamom, ginger, that specific comfort that meant home in a way no California craftsman bungalow ever fully could. She took one look at my face and knew. Didn't say anything, just turned off the stove and wrapped her arms around me. I stood there in my Patagonia vest, the uniform of the Silicon Valley engineering class, and felt like a fraud. All those years pretending I belonged in this world of seed rounds and disruption, and one conversation reduced me to exactly what Marcus believed: I was disposable, replaceable, a cost to be optimized. "Zara's tuition," I said into her shoulder. "It's due Friday. $23,000. I was going to cover it with the equity vesting next week." "We'll figure it out," she whispered. But I heard the fear beneath the words, the tremor that spoke of all the other times we'd figured it out. The year we lived on lentils and rice, so I could send money home for my father's heart surgery. The months we slept on an air mattress in a studio, so we could afford my mother's diabetes medication. The endless paperwork, the immigration attorneys, the constant low-grade anxiety that everything we'd built could vanish with one denied petition, one layoff, one bad quarter. America had never been easy for us, but it had been possible. Now I wasn't sure. That night, after Aisha fell asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my personal laptop open. Not the company machine they'd already remotely wiped. I knew that was coming. They'd done it to others before me, always on a Friday afternoon, always with the same sterile email about data security. But my own device, where I'd kept meticulous records of everything. Not corporate espionage, just survival instinct. The immigrant's habit of documentation, of creating paper trails, of never trusting institutions to remember your value. 12 years of architectural decisions, client relationships, system designs. Every vulnerability I'd patched, every shortcut I'd warned against, every time I'd been overruled by people who didn't understand the technical debt they were accumulating. And something else. Something I'd started 3 months ago when I first sensed the wind shifting, when the consultant's presentation had landed like a threat rather than a strategy. A side project. Nothing fancy. Just a tool I'd built to solve a problem I'd noticed while managing our third-party integrations. Payment processors were constantly breaking their APIs, causing cascading failures for merchants who didn't have engineering teams to adapt quickly. The big companies had entire departments to handle this. Small businesses, the bodegas, the food trucks, the immigrant-owned shops that reminded me of my parents' friends back home, they just suffered. Lost sales, angry customers, hours on hold with technical support that didn't understand their urgency. I built a middleware layer that normalized everything, made it plug and play for small businesses, called it BridgeSync, ran it as a hobby, helping a few local businesses in San Jose who couldn't afford enterprise solutions. Maria's Taqueria, where I'd eaten lunch twice a week for 8 years. The Patel family's liquor store that stayed open late so engineers could buy emergency snacks. Mr. Kim's dry cleaning business where Aisha took her interview suits. People who'd welcomed us to the neighborhood, who'd asked about Zara's schooling, who treated us like neighbors rather than visa holders. I pulled up the analytics. 300 active users. Modest revenue, not enough to live on, but enough to prove the concept worked. Enough to show that I'd identified a real need and served it with something better than the alternatives. And then I checked my email. 12 new signups today alone. A message from a venture capitalist I'd met at a conference last year, someone who'd actually listened when I explained the technical architecture instead of looking over my shoulder for more important people. "Hey Harry, heard you're exploring new opportunities. Want to talk about what you're building? I think there's something here." The universe has timing. Sometimes cruel, sometimes perfect, sometimes both at once, intertwined so tightly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat there watching the numbers climb, drinking cold chai, and remembering something my father told me before I left Karachi. He'd walk me to the airport bus stop at 4 a.m., carrying my single suitcase. This man who'd never been on a plane in his life. "Beta," he'd said, using the Urdu word for son that always made me feel simultaneously loved and inadequate. "In America, they will tell you to climb their ladder, but always build your own stairs, because one day, they will move the ladder." Wednesday morning my phone exploded. Not literally, though it felt like it. Slack notifications from former colleagues I'd been removed from all channels, but people found my number. Panic in every message, the kind of technical panic that has its own particular frequency. The payment processing system was down. Not just down, catastrophically down. Transactions failing across the entire platform, millions in merchant revenue frozen. The kind of outage that makes national news and destroys companies, that ends careers and crater valuations. I read the messages without responding. Marcus calling, desperate, voicemails piling up like snow against a door. The board chair reaching out through LinkedIn with the casual tone of someone who'd ignored me for years. Clients I'd personally onboarded 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, begging for help because they knew I didn't know how they knew, but they knew that I was the one who understood the system's nervous system, its circulatory system, its hidden weaknesses and secret strengths. I made coffee. Strong, bitter, the way I'd learned to drink it during all-nighters in my 20s when I was still trying to prove myself. Aisha came downstairs, saw me smiling at my phone, and raised an eyebrow. She was still in her robe, hair tied back, beautiful in the morning light that filtered through our kitchen window. "What happened? You look like you swallowed a secret. Remember how I always said the company couldn't survive without me?" I stirred in the sugar, watching it dissolve into the dark liquid. Turns out I was right. Their entire payment infrastructure collapsed 6 hours after they wiped my access. Something about the failover protocols I designed, the ones Marcus said were over-engineered and unnecessary complexity. By Thursday, the story had leaked to TechCrunch. FinTech unicorn faces existential crisis after key engineer departure. The article didn't name me, but everyone in the industry knew. The comments section was brutal, the kind of public autopsy that Silicon Valley specializes in. This is what happens when you treat your infrastructure like a cost center. Firing your senior architect during scale season? Bold strategy. Hope their Dando insurance is paid up. Anyone know who the engineer was? Sounds like they built everything. Marcus showed up at my door Thursday evening. Uninvited, sweat stains on his $1,000 button-down, eyes wild in a way I'd never seen in the polished conference rooms where he delivered my termination. His Tesla was parked crooked at the curb, hazards flashing, like he'd abandoned it mid-crisis. Aisha wouldn't let him pass the entryway, just stood there with her arms crossed, that Pakistani auntie energy that transcends all cultural boundaries, while I leaned against the kitchen counter 20 feet away, sipping my tea with deliberate slowness. "I need you to come back," Marcus said. No preamble, no apology, just need. The word Americans use when they want something without acknowledging what they owe, without recognizing the asymmetry of the request. "That's not how terminations work," I said. "You explained that to me on Tuesday. Something about different directions, different visions, optimizing for the future. This is serious, Harry. We're looking at $40 million in lost processing fees, regulatory investigations. The Series D is in jeopardy. Our biggest client is threatening to walk. We're 12 hours away from a complete liquidity crisis." I sipped my chai. The good stuff. The kind Aisha's mother sends from Lahore in carefully packed boxes that take 6 weeks to arrive. I'm aware of the severity. I built the system, remember? I know exactly what's broken and exactly how long it will take to fix. I know that your junior engineers are spinning in circles because nobody documented the emergency protocols. I know that your Bangalore team is 12 hours away and has never seen the production environment. I know that you've got maybe 18 hours before this becomes a terminal event for the company. Name your price. Desperation looks different on privileged faces. I'd seen it before, in the early days, when clients would beg me to recover their data after crashes, when I'd pull all-nighters to save businesses from their own mistakes, but never from someone who'd held my career in their hands and chosen to crush it, who'd looked at 12 years of contribution and seen only a number to be reduced. I don't want to come back, Marcus. That stopped him. He'd prepared for negotiation, for numbers, for the transactional language of Silicon Valley, where everything has a price. Not for refusal. Not for the possibility that I might value something more than his money. What do you mean? Where else would you go? You're on an H-1B. You have 60 days to find a new sponsor, or you have to leave the country. You have a family, responsibilities, and here was the moment. The one I'd rehearsed in my head since Tuesday, since the cardboard box, since the drive home watching the sunset paint the 101 Golden while my hands shook on the steering wheel. The American dream isn't a house with a picket fence. It's not a green card or a corner office or a Tesla in the driveway. It's the moment when you realize your value isn't determined by someone else's spreadsheet, when you stop accepting the terms they set and start writing your own. I'm starting my own company. BridgeSync. You've probably seen the TechCrunch article about the middleware layer that's saving small businesses during your outage. We're processing $2 million in transactions daily now. Grew 500% this week. Sequoia is interested, Andreessen too. The color drained from his face. Not metaphorically. Actually, I watched it happen. That flush of entitlement giving way to the gray of understanding, the dawning comprehension that he'd fired the wrong person at the wrong time, and in doing so, had created his own competition. The monster he'd tried to bury was rising on its own. You're using proprietary knowledge, he stammered. We have non-compete clauses, IP assignment agreements. Everything you built belongs to us. I smiled. The first genuine smile since Tuesday, the kind that reaches your eyes and crinkles the corners. I had 3 attorneys review everything before I incorporated. Everything I built at BridgeSync is clean room. Open source components, publicly available APIs, nothing that touches your proprietary stack. I pulled out my phone, showed him the incorporation documents, the trademark filings, the careful architecture that kept my new life separate from the old. Delaware C Corp. Sequoia is leading my seed round. Term sheet came through this morning. The lie was small. Sequoia was interested, but hadn't committed. Andreessen had only reached out for coffee, but the look on his face was worth it. Because here's the truth about power in America. It's not about where you went to school or who your parents know or how much money you raised in your Series A. It's about who needs whom, and right now, Marcus Chen needed me more than I'd ever needed his validation, his approval, his permission to exist in the spaces he'd always taken for granted. I'll sue, he said, weakly, knowing already that discovery would reveal his own negligence, the missing documentation, the architectural decisions made by committee that had created this vulnerability, knowing that a lawsuit would drag his failures into public view, would destroy what remained of his reputation, would finish what the outage had started. You could, I agreed, or you could hire BridgeSync as a consulting firm to fix your outage. Emergency rates, of course, $5,000 per hour, minimum 40 hours paid up front, non-negotiable, plus a public statement acknowledging my contribution to your infrastructure, which my attorneys will draft, plus a release from any non-compete or IP claims, plus a recommendation letter for my green card application, which you'll sign personally. He stared at me. The silence stretched between us, filled with the sounds of our San Jose neighborhood, lawn sprinklers, the distant freeway noise, the life I'd built while he was busy planning my obsolescence, the community that had sustained me when his world had rejected me. That's extortion? That's business, I corrected. You taught me that. Different direction, remember? I'm just optimizing my human capital, creating value from assets you'd discarded. Very Silicon Valley. Aisha made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Marcus looked at her, then at me, and something in his posture collapsed. The confidence of inherited wealth meeting the reality of earned expertise. The moment when theory meets practice and practice wins decisively. 24 hours, I said. After that my rates go up. Or you can try explaining to your board why you fired the only person who could save your company right before your biggest client conference. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your different direction. He left without another word. I watched his Tesla pull away from our curb, that ridiculous electric hum that had always seemed to me like the sound of money pretending to care about the future, and felt something shift in my chest. Not victory, not revenge, something cleaner, recognition. I'd spent 12 years trying to be the model immigrant, the good employee, the invisible backbone that kept everything running while others took credit. And in 3 days of chaos, I'd learned that invisibility was never the goal, that the price of acceptance into their world was too high if it required your erasure. The deal closed Friday morning. My former employer wired $200,000 to BridgeSync's corporate account. I spent 6 hours in their offices, not as an employee, but as a contractor with a badge that expired at midnight, a literal expiration date on my temporary return to the place that had been my professional home for 12 years. I patched the systems I'd designed, fixed the vulnerabilities I'd warned about, restored the functionality that thousands of businesses depended on. Marcus watched from a distance, never approaching, never apologizing. That was fine. Apologies are for relationships, and we were past that. This was transaction. The pure, honest language of American commerce, stripped of the pretense that had always obscured the power dynamics. I was no longer pretending to be part of his team. I was a vendor, a service provider, an equal in the marketplace of skills and needs. But here's what happened next. The real next. Not the Hollywood ending with swelling music and fade to black. I fixed their system. Not perfectly. I left enough technical debt to ensure they'd need ongoing support for years, enough complexity that they'd never fully understand what I'd built without my guidance. But functionally, merchants could process payments again. The Series D closed, though at a reduced valuation that cost Marcus his job 6 months later, when the board finally connected his strategic vision to the $40 million near-death experience. Karma moves slowly in Silicon Valley, but it moves with mathematical precision. BridgeSync kept growing. Not because I sabotaged my former employer, but because I'd identified a real need and served it better than anyone else. Small businesses, immigrant entrepreneurs, the overlooked corners of the economy where people like me had always survived and thrived, despite the obstacles placed in our path. We built tools for them: fair pricing, transparent terms, documentation that actually made sense. The radical concept that technology should serve people instead of extracting from them, that success could be mutual rather than zero-sum. My daughter Zara started 10th grade at the private school we'd worried about affording. She joined the robotics team, started learning Python, told her friends that her dad was, like, a legit founder now. My mother's chemo went into remission, the scans showing what we'd prayed for, what we'd sacrificed for, what we'd built our entire American life around achieving. My father finally visited California, saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time at 73 years old, and cried in a way that made me understand everything he'd sacrificed so I could stand on this shore, so I could build something he could be proud of without fully understanding. And me? I learned that the American dream isn't about becoming indispensable to someone else's machine. It's not about working yourself to exhaustion so that they'll finally see your value. It's about building machines of your own, machines that serve your community, your values, your definition of success. Machines that can't be taken away because they exist in your mind, your relationships, your unique combination of skills and perspective, and stubborn refusal to accept the limits others set for you. Marcus sent me a LinkedIn request last month. He's at his 3rd startup now, still making the same mistakes, still surprised when the world doesn't bend to his expectations, still firing experienced people to hire cheaper alternatives, and wondering why things break. I didn't accept. Not out of spite, but because some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some directions are truly different, And the distance between us is no longer just professional, it's philosophical, existential, complete. To everyone watching who's ever been told they're redundant, who's ever sat in that conference room, feeling their future evaporate like morning fog, who's ever questioned whether their sacrifice meant anything in a system that seems designed to discard them, I see you. Your work matters. Your knowledge matters. The late nights, the missed birthdays, the constant anxiety of trying to prove your worth to people who benefit from your insecurity, all of it matters. But not because they say so. Because you built it. Because it's yours. Because the skills in your hands and the wisdom in your mind are real assets that no spreadsheet can capture. And the moment you stop letting other people define your value is the moment you become truly free. Not free from struggle. Freedom doesn't mean ease, but free from the prison of their approval, their metrics, their narrow definitions of who you can be and what you can achieve. Comment below if you've ever had to rebuild from nothing. If you've ever watched someone underestimate you and paid the price.